I've lived long enough to know that family can be your greatest blessing or your deepest wound. The day my daughter Miranda looked me in the eyes and said I would never see my grandchildren again, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. What she didn't realize was that the elegant subdivision she called home, all 36 houses, the community center, and even the pristine park where my grandchildren played, belonged to me. Sometimes life gives you unexpected cards to play when you need them most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra, special for you. My name is Margaret Wilson. At 72 years old, I've accumulated more wrinkles than I care to count, but I've also gathered wisdom that only comes from decades of both triumph and heartbreak. I spent 43 years building Wilson Financial Services from a small office above a bakery into one of the most respected wealth management firms in Portland. My late husband Robert died 15 years ago, leaving me to manage both our company and investments alone. I did more than manage. I thrived. The Pacific Northwest rain tapped gently against my kitchen window as I prepared my morning tea, Earl Grey with a splash of milk. My spacious but modest home sat on a small hill overlooking Oakwood Estates, the upscale subdivision I'd developed nearly 20 years ago through a property investment company I'd established under a separate LLC. Few people knew I owned it. I preferred to keep my financial affairs private, a habit from decades of advising high-net-worth clients who valued discretion above all else. From my breakfast nook, I could just make out the roof of Miranda's house, a sprawling Tudor-style home at the end of Mapleview Drive. My daughter lived there with her husband Patrick and my 3 grandchildren, Emma, 12, Lucas, 9, and little Sophie, 5. I'd offered them the house at a substantially reduced rate when Patrick's architecture firm was still finding its footing. That was 7 years ago. Now his business was booming, specializing in sustainable luxury homes that graced magazine covers. The tea warmed my arthritic hands as I scrolled through photos of Sophie's recent ballet recital on my iPad. My heart swelled seeing her serious expression as she concentrated on her plie. I'd been sitting in the front row, of course, recording every moment despite Miranda's obvious annoyance at my presence. The tension between us had been growing for years, but I kept showing up, kept trying to maintain a relationship with my grandchildren. My phone chimed with a text message from Miranda. "Mom, we need to talk. Coming over at 10. No pleasantries, no context, just a demand, as usual." I sighed, placed my mug in the sink, and headed to my office to review some documents. Before she arrived, the oak-paneled room held remnants of my professional life, certificates, awards, and photographs with financial luminaries I'd worked with over the decades. Behind my desk hung my most prized possession, an original Edward Hopper print that Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. The solitary figure in the painting reminded me of myself, contemplative, independent, and perhaps a bit lonely. The doorbell rang precisely at 10. Miranda had inherited my punctuality, if not my patience or perspective. I opened the door to find my daughter looking polished as always in her designer jeans and cashmere sweater, her chestnut hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. She'd inherited my height and Robert's hazel eyes, but the warmth that, once filled, those eyes had been replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Good morning, Miranda," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Would you like some tea?" "I don't have time," she replied, her voice clipped as she strode into my living room. She remained standing, making it clear this wouldn't be a lengthy visit. "I'll get straight to the point. Patrick and I have been discussing our family dynamic, and we've made some decisions." The way she said family dynamic sent a chill through me. Corporate language for a personal relationship never boded well. "What kind of decisions?" I asked, lowering myself onto my favorite armchair, the one with the perfect view of the mountains on clear days. Miranda paced in front of my fireplace, her designer boots clicking against the hardwood floors. "We feel that your influence on the children has become Problematic. Problematic? I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the anxiety building in my chest. In what way? You undermine our parenting at every turn, she said, turning to face me. You buy them extravagant gifts after we've explicitly said no. You fill them with sugar when we're trying to limit their intake. You've started talking to Emma about investment strategies and college funds when she should be focusing on middle, school, and making friends. I took a deep breath. Miranda, I'm simply trying to give them opportunities and knowledge that will serve them well. That's exactly the problem, she interrupted, her voice rising. You're always pushing your agenda, just like you did with me. Always the lessons, the preparation for the future, the emphasis on achievement and financial security. It's suffocating them, just like it suffocated me. The accusation stung. Yes, I'd been strict with Miranda, insistent that she understand the value of education and financial independence, especially as a woman in a world that often undermined female ambition. But suffocating? I'd always thought I was giving her wings, not clipping them. I never meant to suffocate you, I said quietly. I only wanted to give you tools to succeed in a challenging world. Miranda laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Well, I succeeded, didn't I? I have the perfect husband, the perfect house, the perfect children. And now I want them to have what I never had, a childhood free from constant pressure and lessons in financial literacy. I wanted to point out that her perfect house had been partially my gift, that her children's private school tuition came from the trust fund I'd established, that her husband's first major client had been my referral. But I bit my tongue. Reminding her of these things would only widen the gulf between us. What exactly are you asking of me, Miranda? I finally said. She stopped pacing and looked directly at me, her jaw set in a determined line. Patrick and I have decided it would be best if you step back from your involvement with the children. No more unscheduled visits, no more gifts without our approval, no more private conversations about finances or the future. My heart sank. You're limiting my access to my own grandchildren? We're establishing healthy boundaries, she corrected, using that detached, therapeutic language she'd adopted in recent years. The children need consistency, and your constant interference disrupts our family unit. And if I don't agree to these boundaries? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Miranda's expression hardened further. Then we'll have to reconsider any contact at all. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself. You would keep my grandchildren from me entirely? Over some perceived overstepping? It's not perceived, Mother. It's real, and it's damaging. Her voice had that rehearsed quality that told me she'd practiced this conversation, probably with that family therapist she was always quoting. And yes, if you can't respect our rules, then you won't see them. It's that simple. Nothing about this felt simple. I thought of little Sophie's hand in mine as we fed ducks at the pond last weekend. Of Lucas showing me his science project with such pride in his eyes. Of Emma confiding in me about her dreams of becoming an architect like her father. The thought of losing those moments made my chest physically ache. I see, I said, struggling to keep my composure. And have you discussed this with the children? Do they understand why their grandmother is suddenly going to disappear from their lives? A flicker of uncertainty crossed Miranda's face before her expression hardened again. We'll explain it in an age-appropriate way. They'll understand that sometimes adults need to work through their differences. How convenient, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. I'm sure they'll find that explanation completely satisfying when they're missing their grandmother. Miranda sighed dramatically, glancing at her watch. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I'm talking about. You always position yourself as the victim when you're asked to respect boundaries. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emotional manipulation? I was stating a simple truth. My grandchildren would miss me. But I recognized the futility of arguing further. Miranda had made up her mind, and nothing I said now would change it. "I need to go," she said, already moving toward the door. "I have a charity board meeting at 11. Think about what I've said, Mother. This doesn't have to be permanent if you're willing to follow our guidelines." She paused with her hand on the doorknob. "We can talk again next week." And then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her expensive perfume and the devastating reality of her ultimatum. I remained in my chair, too stunned to move. Outside, the clouds had thickened, and rain was now falling in earnest, mirroring the storm within me. I'd faced many challenges in my life, building a business in a male-dominated industry, losing Robert to cancer, navigating retirement and widowhood, but nothing had prepared me for this hollow feeling of having my own child threaten to sever my connection to my grandchildren. After what felt like hours, I finally rose and moved to my office on unsteady legs. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick folder labeled Oakwood Estates Holdings. Inside were the legal documents confirming my ownership of the entire subdivision, all 36 homes, the community center, the park, and even the small shopping area at the entrance. I'd established Wilson Property Group, LLC, decades ago as a separate investment vehicle, deliberately keeping my name off public records for privacy. Few people knew about this aspect of my wealth. Miranda certainly didn't. She had always assumed her father was the financial mastermind behind our success, never bothering to understand that I had been an equal partner in building our fortune and had substantially grown it since his passing. My finger traced over the property map, lingering on Miranda's house at 47 Mapleview Drive. The most expensive home in the subdivision, with its expansive yard backing up to the community nature preserve. The home she believed she'd purchased, at a discounted price because of a motivated seller, when in reality, I'd arranged the entire transaction. I hadn't kept this information from Miranda out of malice or manipulation. I simply believed that financial independence was important, that she and Patrick needed to feel they'd achieved their success on their own merits. Perhaps that had been a mistake. Perhaps I'd been wrong about many things. My cell phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The screen showed my friend Eleanor's name. Eleanor had been my closest confidant since our college days at Reed. She lived just 3 houses down from Miranda in the subdivision, a coincidence Miranda believed was due to Eleanor following her there, never suspecting I had offered Eleanor the property at a significant discount after her husband died. "Maggie? Are you there?" Eleanor's concerned voice came through when I answered, but didn't immediately speak. "Yes, I'm here," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "What's wrong? You sound terrible." The simple question broke the dam. Tears I'd been holding back spilled over as I recounted Miranda's visit and ultimatum. "Oh, Maggie," Eleanor sighed when I finished. "I actually saw her car at your house and wondered if something was happening. She seemed in quite a hurry when she left." "She's always in a hurry these days," I said, wiping my eyes, too busy with her perfect life to consider anyone else's feelings, especially her mother's. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor asked. "About the grandchildren, I mean." I looked down at the property documents spread across my desk, a plan slowly forming in my mind. "I'm going to think very carefully about my next steps," I said. "And I may need your help." "Whatever you need," Eleanor said without hesitation. "You know I'm here for you." After we hung up, I spent the afternoon reviewing my options. As the true owner of Oakwood Estates, I had significant leverage, a fact Miranda was completely unaware of. But wielding that power required careful consideration. I didn't want to destroy my relationship with my daughter. I wanted to repair it. I didn't want to use my ownership as a weapon, but perhaps as a way to open her eyes to some hard truths about independence, respect, and family. That evening, as darkness fell over the subdivision I'd created, I made a decision. I would not accept being erased from my grandchildren's lives. I would not allow Miranda's misguided resentment to sever the bonds I'd formed with Emma, Lucas, and Sophie. But neither would I storm in with threats and revelations that might cause irreparable damage. Instead, I would build my case carefully and strategically, gathering allies and evidence. I would give Miranda one chance to reconsider her position before I revealed the truth about who really controlled the roof over her head, the park where her children played, and the community she so proudly claimed as her own. I pulled out my address book and began making calls to other residents of Oakwood Estates, my tenants, though they didn't know it. Many were longtime friends who had no idea of my connection to the property. Others were newer residents who knew me only as Miranda's mother or as the elderly woman who chaired the community garden committee. By midnight, I had spoken with 12 families and arranged coffee with 3 key members of the Homeowners Association, an organization I technically owned but had always allowed to function independently. As I finally prepared for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared tired, the lines around her eyes deeper than usual. But there was also a familiar determination in her gaze, a spark that had built a financial empire from nothing. Miranda had never truly seen that woman, the strategist, the businesswoman, the survivor. She'd only seen the mother she believed had pushed too hard, expected too much. Soon, my daughter would come to understand that I was both, the mother, who wanted the best for her children, and the formidable woman who had created much more than she'd ever acknowledged. And if that understanding came with the revelation that her perfect independence was built on foundations I had laid, then perhaps that was a lesson she needed to learn. I turned off the light and slipped into bed, my mind still churning with plans. Tomorrow would be the first day of my careful campaign to reclaim my place in my grandchildren's lives, and unlike Miranda, I had the patience, resources, and determination to play the long game. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought provided surprising comfort. Miranda had always underestimated me. It was time she learned that was a serious mistake. The next morning dawned with surprising clarity for early autumn in Portland. I rose before the sun, a habit from decades in the financial world where early risers claimed the best opportunities. My morning ritual remained unchanged despite the emotional earthquake of yesterday. Stretching exercises for my arthritic joints, a light breakfast of steel-cut oats with blueberries, and a review of the financial markets on my tablet. But today, alongside the business section of the Portland Tribune, I opened a leather-bound notebook and began mapping out my strategy. If there was one thing 43 years in wealth management had taught me, it was that emotion-driven decisions rarely yielded optimal results. I needed to approach this situation with the same analytical precision I'd applied to complex financial problems throughout my career. My doorbell rang precisely at 8:30. Eleanor stood on my porch, immaculately dressed as always, a thermal carafe in one hand and a folder in the other. "I brought reinforcements," she said, holding up the carafe. "My special roast, and I dug up some interesting information you might find useful." We settled at my kitchen table, the morning light streaming through the windows. At 74, Eleanor remained sharp as ever. Before retirement, she'd been a formidable corporate attorney, and that investigative instinct had never faded. "I've been thinking about your situation with Miranda," she said, pouring us each a cup of coffee. "And I wonder if you've considered what's really driving this sudden ultimatum. Has anything changed recently in their household?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, considering her question. "Patrick's firm won that major sustainable design award last month. Miranda's been appointed to the board of the Portland Arts Foundation. On the surface, everything seems to be going well for them. Sometimes success creates its own pressures," Eleanor observed, especially when it's relatively new. She was right, of course. Patrick's architecture firm had struggled for the first few years of their marriage. Miranda had worked part-time as an interior designer to help make ends meet while raising the children. Their ascent to upper-middle-class comfort had been relatively recent and partially facilitated by my unseen support. "There's something else," Eleanor said, opening the folder she'd brought. "I've been keeping my ear to the ground at homeowners association meetings. The Hendersons mentioned that Miranda has been pushing for stricter enforcement of the community guidelines. Specifically, she wants to limit visitation periods for non-resident family members." I nearly spilled my coffee. "She's trying to create a policy to keep me out of the neighborhood?" Eleanor nodded grimly. "The proposal would restrict non-resident family visits to no more than 3 consecutive days without special approval from the board. She's framing it as a security measure, but several residents have mentioned it seems targeted. The calculated nature of Miranda's actions hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just setting boundaries within her own home. She was attempting to institutionalize my exclusion from the entire community. "When is this proposal being voted on?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Next. Tuesday's meeting." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. "Miranda doesn't know I'm aware of your ownership of the properties, of course. She's been quite condescending when explaining the proposal to me, suggesting at my age I might not understand modern security concerns." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Miranda patronizing Eleanor, one of the sharpest legal minds I'd ever known, about rules for a community I actually owned. "Who else serves on the current board?" I asked, reaching for my notebook. "James Foster is president. You remember, the retired physician? Then there's Diane Abernathy, Miranda, of course, Richard Chan, and that young tech entrepreneur, Zoe something." "Zoe Levinson," I supplied. "Her daughter is in Sophie's ballet class. We've chatted at recitals." I made a few notes. How do they seem to be leaning on Miranda's proposal? James and Richard seem skeptical. Diane follows Miranda's lead on everything. Zoe hasn't indicated her position. Eleanor leaned forward. "But here's the interesting part. Miranda has been hosting little pre-meeting gatherings at her house. Very exclusive. I suspect she's building support for more than just this visitation policy." My pen paused over the paper. "What else?" "There's talk of extensive renovations to the community center, new restrictions on property modifications, substantial increases to the annual dues." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Changes that would require significant financial commitments from homeowners." The picture became clearer. Miranda wasn't just asserting control over her own family. She was positioning herself as a power broker in the community, a community she had no idea I controlled. "I need to attend that homeowners meeting," I said decisively. Eleanor looked concerned. "Miranda might see that as a direct challenge. It could escalate the situation with the grandchildren." "I won't be confrontational," I assured her. "I'll simply attend as a concerned community member. After all, many of the residents are friends I've known for years. It wouldn't be unusual for me to take an interest." We spent the next hour developing our approach. Eleanor would continue gathering information about Miranda's other initiatives. I would reconnect with key residents who might provide insight or support. We would both attend Tuesday's meeting, but separately, to avoid raising suspicions. Eleanor prepared to leave. She paused at the door. "Maggie, have you considered the possibility that you might have to reveal your ownership of the subdivision? That's a significant card to play." I nodded solemnly. "It's my nuclear option. Eleanor, I'll only use it if absolutely necessary. I want Miranda to recognize my place in my grandchildren's lives because she understands its value to them, not because I've forced her hand with property rights." After Eleanor left, I dressed carefully in a casual but elegant outfit, tailored Navy slacks, a crisp white blouse, and my favorite jade pendant that Robert had brought back from a business trip to Hong Kong decades ago. If I was going to begin making strategic appearances around the community, I wanted to project confidence and composure. My first stop was the small shopping plaza at the entrance to Oakwood Estates. The Morning Brew Cafe served as the unofficial community hub, a place where residents gathered to exchange news and opinions. The owner, Gabriella, had been one of my first tenants when I developed the commercial spaces 15 years ago. Though like most, she believed she was leasing from an anonymous property management company. The cafe was bustling with mid-morning customers when I arrived. Gabriella spotted me from behind the counter and immediately came over to greet me with a warm hug. "Mrs. Wilson, it's been too long since you visited us," she said, leading me to a small table by the window. "I've been keeping to myself a bit lately," I admitted. "But I've missed your cinnamon scones." "Say no more." Gabriella winked, disappearing briefly, before returning with a still warm scone and a pot of Darjeeling tea. On the house for one of my favorite customers. As I enjoyed my tea, several residents stopped by my table to chat. Martin and David Lee, a retired couple who lived near the community garden, updated me on this year's harvest. Catherine Fleming, a young mother of twins, thanked me again for the developmental toys I'd sent when her babies were born. Even the usually reserved Dr. Foster paused to inquire about my health and mentioned he was looking forward to seeing me at community events again. In each conversation, I gently steered the topic toward the upcoming homeowners meeting and the proposed changes. The reactions were illuminating. Most residents seemed unaware of the details of Miranda's visitation policy proposal, but several expressed concern about rumors of increased fees and restrictions. "Between us," Dr. Foster said in a lowered voice, "I'm not convinced these changes are necessary. The community has functioned well for years with our current guidelines, but Miranda can be quite persuasive." I nodded understandingly. "Change isn't always improvement, is it, James? Especially when something is working well already." He seemed relieved by my response. "Precisely. Perhaps you could attend the meeting? You've always had a practical perspective on these matters." "I'll do my best to be there," I promised, suppressing a smile at how perfectly he'd played into my plans. By noon, I'd spoken with 7 influential community members, planting subtle seeds of doubt about the necessity of Miranda's proposals without directly criticizing my daughter. It was a delicate balance. I needed to build opposition to her restrictive policies without turning neighbors against her personally. As I prepared to leave, Gabriella approached with a small package of additional scones for later. She hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone. "Mrs. Wilson, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but your granddaughter Sophie was here yesterday, with her nanny. She seemed quite upset, asking when she would see you again. The nanny tried to distract her, but—" Gabriella shrugged sympathetically. "Children notice more than adults think." My heart tightened. "Thank you for telling me, Gabriella. Sophie and I are very close." "We all know what a wonderful grandmother you are," she said firmly. "The children from the subdivision love when you host cookie decorating at Christmas and your garden tours in the spring. It would be a shame if those traditions ended." I clutched the package of scones, fighting back sudden tears. In my strategic planning, I'd momentarily lost sight of the immediate emotional impact on my grandchildren. Sophie was asking for me. She was confused and hurt by my sudden absence. "The traditions won't end," I assured Gabriella with newfound determination. "Some things are too important to lose." I left the cafe with renewed purpose and a modified plan forming in my mind. The homeowners' meeting was still days away. I couldn't wait that long to establish some form of contact with my grandchildren. Back at home, I retrieved a carved wooden box from my office shelf. Inside were 3 small jade pendants, similar to the one I wore but sized for children. I'd purchased them years ago, planning to give them to my grandchildren when they were older But circumstances had changed. I carefully wrapped each pendant in tissue paper and placed them in individual gift boxes with handwritten notes. For Emma, the eldest, strong women know their own worth. Wear this as a reminder of yours. For Lucas, your curious mind will take you far. This stone represents wisdom. And for Sophie, remember that Grandma's love is always with you, just like this special stone. Next, I selected 3 books from my library, thoughtfully chosen for each child's interests and reading level. For Emma, a beautifully illustrated biography of pioneering women architects. For Lucas, an engaging book about the natural sciences. For Sophie, a collection of fairy tales featuring brave, kind heroines. I hesitated before packaging these gifts. Miranda had explicitly forbidden unapproved presents. But these weren't extravagant electronics or sugar-laden treats. They were meaningful keepsakes and educational books. Still, delivering them required careful consideration. I couldn't take them to Miranda's house directly. That would provoke an immediate confrontation. I couldn't send them with Eleanor without potentially drawing her into the conflict. After careful thought, I realized there was one perfect opportunity: Emma's soccer game tomorrow afternoon at the community field. Miranda never attended these games, claiming they interfered with her charity committee meetings. Patrick typically took all 3 children, with the younger 2 playing at the adjacent playground while Emma competed. If I timed my appearance correctly, I could briefly connect with my grandchildren in a public setting where a scene would be difficult to create. That evening, I called my grandson directly on the child-friendly phone Patrick had given him for emergencies. Lucas answered on the second ring. "Grandma!" His excited voice filled me with joy. "Where have you been? Mom said you were busy." "I've been thinking about you all," I said carefully. "I understand I won't be visiting as often for a while, but I wanted to check if you'll be at Emma's soccer game tomorrow." "Yeah, Dad's taking us. Mom has some meeting thing." His voice lowered conspiratorially. "Sophie keeps asking when you're coming over. She cried last night because you weren't here to read her special voices bedtime story." My heart clenched, but I kept my tone light. "Well, I might stop by the soccer field tomorrow to cheer for Emma. Perhaps I'll see you there." "Really?" Lucas sounded thrilled. "That would be awesome. I'll tell Emma and Sophie." "Actually," I said quickly, "let's make it a surprise, shall we? Sometimes surprises are more fun." After we hung up, I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The same sky stretched over Miranda's house just a few streets away. My daughter believed she was protecting her children from my influence, but all she was doing was depriving them of a loving presence in their lives. Tomorrow would be my first small countermove in this painful chess match. Not an aggressive attack, but a gentle reminder that I wouldn't simply disappear from my grandchildren's lives without resistance. The community soccer field bustled with activity when I arrived the following afternoon. Parents and grandparents lined the sidelines, cheering enthusiastically as 2 teams of preteen girls battled for control of the ball. I spotted Emma immediately. In her blue and white uniform, her long brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail as she focused intensely on the game. I deliberately positioned myself on the opposite side from where Patrick stood with Lucas and Sophie, giving myself time to assess the situation. Patrick appeared distracted, alternating between watching Emma's game and responding to messages on his phone. Lucas had wandered to the playground equipment while Sophie sat on a bench looking bored. Perfect. I approached Sophie first, moving casually along the sidelines until I reached her bench. Her face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds when she spotted me. "Grandma!" she squealed, launching herself into my arms. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hello, my sweet girl. I've missed you." "Mommy said you're too busy to visit," Sophie said with a frown. "Are you too busy for me?" "Never," I assured her, sitting beside her on the bench. I am never ever too busy for you. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated disagreements, but it doesn't change how much I love you. Sophie nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Mommy and Daddy have disagreements too. Sometimes Daddy sleeps in the guest room. This was interesting information that I carefully filed away. That happens sometimes in families. But today, I brought you a special surprise. I discreetly handed her the smallest gift box. This is a very special stone that reminds me of you. You can keep it somewhere safe or wear it, but it means that my love is always with you. Sophie's eyes widened as she opened the box and discovered the jade pendant. It's so pretty, like your necklace. Exactly like mine, I smiled. Now, could you quietly let Lucas know I'm here? I have something for him too. Sophie nodded eagerly and skipped toward the playground. Moments later, Lucas approached, trying to act casual but unable to contain his grin. Hey, Grandma, he said, attempting to sound nonchalant as he sat beside me. Cool that you could make it. I squeezed his shoulder affectionately. I wouldn't miss Emma's game, and I brought you something. I handed him his package. This made me think of you. Lucas unwrapped the book first, his eyes lighting up at the cover. Awesome. Dad and I were just talking about getting something like this. Then he opened the small jewelry box, looking slightly confused at the jade pendant. It's a symbol of wisdom, I explained. In many cultures, jade represents knowledge and protection. I thought you might appreciate having something meaningful, rather than just another toy. To my surprise, Lucas immediately slipped the leather cord over his head, tucking the pendant beneath his t-shirt. Thanks, Grandma. I'll wear it when Mom's not looking. His expression turned serious. She's been weird lately. Says we need to be more independent from outside influences. Are you an outside influence? I'm your grandmother, I said simply. Nothing can change that. Lucas nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. I should get back before Dad notices I'm gone too long. Will you come to my science fair next month? I'll do my very best, I promised, not wanting to make commitments I couldn't keep. As Lucas returned to the playground, I shifted my attention to Emma's soccer game. Her team was ahead by 1 goal, and Emma was playing defense with impressive skill and determination. I felt a surge of pride watching her confidently direct her teammates, showing leadership qualities beyond her 12 years. At halftime, Emma jogged over to get water from Patrick. I saw the moment she noticed me. Her eyes widened, and she glanced anxiously at her father before making her way around the field toward me. Grandma? She approached cautiously, her expression a mixture of joy and concern. Does Mom know you're here? I came to watch you play, I said, deliberately not answering her question. You're doing brilliantly out there, a natural leader. Emma's posture relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained wary. Mom said we're not supposed to see you unless she arranges it. I understand your mother has concerns, I said carefully, but I'm simply attending a community soccer game, which happens to feature my talented granddaughter. Emma glanced over her shoulder at Patrick, who was still occupied with his phone while keeping a loose eye on the younger children. Things have been weird at home, she confided. Mom's been having these dinner parties with people from the homeowners association. She gets really stressed about them being perfect, and she and Dad argue more. Growing up can be complicated, I acknowledged. Sometimes parents go through phases where they're figuring things out too. Yeah, but... Emma hesitated. Mom keeps saying we need to focus on the right relationships and influences, that some people want to control us through their money and expectations. She looked directly at me. I think she means you. The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. Your mother and I have different perspectives on certain things, I said carefully. But my love for you has no strings attached. I brought you something. A few things, actually. I handed her the package with the book and pendant. Emma opened it more cautiously than her siblings had, examining the architecture book with genuine interest, but studying the jade pendant with suspicion. Is this expensive? It's meaningful, I corrected. I have one very similar. I thought, you might like to have something that connects us, even when we can't see each other as often. She turned the pendant over in her palm, considering. Mom says you're always trying to buy our affection. The accusation stung, but I kept my expression neutral. Do you believe that's true, Emma? In your heart, do you think that's why I give you things? Emma thought for a moment, then shook her head. No. You give us stuff you think we'll actually like. Mom and Dad just buy whatever the other kids have. She slipped the pendant into her pocket rather than wearing it. I should get back. Second. Half is starting soon. Of course, play well. I reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. And Emma, if you ever need to talk, you can always call me, no matter what your mother says. As Emma jogged back to her team, I noticed Patrick finally looking in my direction. His expression registered surprise, then concern, but not anger. He gave me a slight nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention back to the younger children. That small gesture gave me hope. Perhaps Patrick wasn't fully aligned with Miranda's extreme position. It was something to explore further. I remained for the rest of the game, cheering appropriately when Emma's team scored again. As the families began to disperse afterward, I deliberately made my exit before Patrick could approach me with the children. This brief contact had accomplished what I needed, reassuring my grandchildren of my continued presence in their lives without directly challenging Miranda's authority. As I walked back to my car, I felt someone fall into step beside me. It was Richard Chan, one of the Homeowners Association board members Eleanor had mentioned. Mrs. Wilson, he greeted me politely. Good to see you supporting the community teams. Emma plays very well, I replied. I wouldn't miss it. Richard nodded, then lowered his voice. I understand there may be some family tension regarding your role in the community. I wanted you to know that not everyone agrees with the proposed restrictions. I maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly I was surprised by his directness. I appreciate that, Richard. I've been part of Oakwood Estates for a long time. Longer than most realize, he said with a meaningful look. My firm handled some of the original development paperwork. I've always respected your decision to remain anonymous. My steps faltered slightly. Richard knew about my ownership? This was unexpected. He smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, your secret has been safe with me for 15 years. I simply wanted you to know that should you choose to attend Tuesday's meeting, you would have support from some board members. Thank you, Richard, I said carefully. That's good to know. As he walked away, I processed this new information. Richard Chan knew about my ownership of the subdivision, but had kept that knowledge private for years. He was offering an alliance against Miranda's proposals without requiring me to reveal my ownership publicly. The chessboard had just become more complex and potentially more advantageous for my position. When I returned home, I found Eleanor waiting on my porch with a large envelope and a concerned expression. I've been trying to reach you, she said as I unlocked the door. Something's happened that you need to know about. Once inside, Eleanor spread several documents across my kitchen table. These were anonymously delivered to my mailbox this morning. They're copies of emails between Miranda and an attorney specializing in elder law and conservatorships. My blood ran cold as I scanned the documents. The emails detailed Miranda's inquiries about having me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs, with references to increasing signs of poor judgment and financially irresponsible decisions. She's building a case to take control of my assets, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It appears so, Eleanor confirmed grimly. And based on these dates, she's been planning this for months. long before yesterday's confrontation about the grandchildren. I sank into a chair, trying to process this new dimension of Miranda's betrayal. My own daughter wasn't just trying to cut me off from my grandchildren. She was actively plotting to seize control of my finances under the guise of protecting me from myself. "Does she have any idea about Oakwood Estates?" I asked, trying to think clearly through the shock. "I don't believe so," Eleanor said. "These emails reference your retirement accounts and primary residence. There's no mention of property, investments, or the LLC." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think strategically rather than emotionally. Who would have access to these emails? And why send them to you rather than directly to me? Eleanor considered this. It could be someone from her attorney's office with ethical concerns, or perhaps someone close to Miranda who disagrees with her approach. She hesitated. Possibly even Patrick. These confrontational tactics don't seem like his style. The thought that Patrick might be trying to warn me provided a glimmer of hope in an otherwise devastating revelation. He had always been more reasonable than Miranda, more willing to see multiple perspectives. If he was beginning to question her actions, that could be significant. "What's your next move?" Eleanor asked quietly. I gathered the scattered documents into a neat pile, my resolve hardening. Tuesday's homeowners meeting has just taken on much greater importance. Miranda isn't just trying to limit my access to the community. She's laying groundwork for a larger power play. "Will you reveal your ownership?" Eleanor pressed. I shook my head. "Not yet. First, I need to understand exactly who I can trust." Richard Chan approached me at the soccer field today. Apparently, he's known about my ownership for years. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "That's unexpected. Could he be the one who sent these?" "Possibly. Or it could be someone else entirely." I stood and moved to the window, looking out toward the community I had built. Before I make my final decision, I need more information, and I need to speak with Patrick privately. Arranging a private meeting with Patrick proved easier than I anticipated. The following morning, I sent a text message directly to his personal phone. "Patrick, I need to speak with you about a matter that affects both our family and your professional reputation. Can we meet privately? No accusations, just information you should have. Margaret." His response came within 10 minutes. "Hendrick's Coffee downtown, 1 p.m. I have a client meeting nearby." The directness of his reply suggested he had been expecting, perhaps even hoping for, this contact. I spent the morning reviewing the conservatorship documents Eleanor had provided, making careful notes of dates, specific language, and the name of the attorney Miranda had consulted. Knowledge was power, especially when dealing with legal maneuvers. Hendrick's Coffee occupied the ground floor of a renovated industrial building in Portland's Pearl District. The exposed brick, soaring ceilings, and carefully distressed furniture created an atmosphere of cultivated casualness that appealed to the architects and designers who frequently held informal meetings there. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. Patrick arrived precisely at 1, dressed in the architect's uniform of a charcoal blazer over a simple black t-shirt, designer glasses framing his thoughtful face. At 43, he retained the lean build and attentive demeanor that had first attracted Miranda 15 years ago. As he approached my table, I noted the shadows beneath his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. Whatever was happening in Sao, their household was taking its toll on him as well. "Margaret," he greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek before sitting down. "Thank you for reaching out." "Thank you for coming," I replied. "I ordered you a cortado. You still take it that way?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face at this small consideration. "Yes, thank you." He took a careful sip, then set the cup down and met my gaze directly. "I assume this is about Miranda's decision regarding your visits with the children." "Partly," I acknowledged. But there's more to discuss. Patrick, before we begin, I want to know where you stand on this restriction. Is this a united front or Miranda's initiative? Patrick's gaze dropped to his cup. He was silent for a long moment before answering. It's complicated. Miranda believes she's protecting the children from what she sees as unhealthy dynamics. I think she's overreacting, but... He sighed. Our marriage has been strained lately. I'm trying to pick my battles, and my relationship with my grandchildren isn't worth fighting for. I kept my tone neutral, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He looked up, pained. The children miss you terribly. Emma barely speaks at home now. Lucas keeps asking, when rules can be broken for special circumstances. And Sophie. He shook his head. Sophie cried herself to sleep the first 2 nights. My heart ached for my grandchildren, but I pressed on. Patrick, I need to show you something. I slid the copies of Miranda's emails across the table. These were anonymously delivered to a friend of mine yesterday. Patrick's expression shifted from confusion to shock as he scanned the documents. His face paled visibly. Conservatorship? Mental incompetence? Margaret? I had no idea she was pursuing this. His reaction appeared genuine, the tightening around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he turned the pages. Either Patrick was an exceptional actor or he was truly blindsided by this revelation. You didn't know? I pressed gently. No. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. God, no. I knew she was frustrated about financial discussions with the children, but this... He gestured at the papers. This is extreme. Has Miranda mentioned concerns about my mental capacity to you or others? I needed to understand how far this narrative had spread. Patrick shook his head firmly. Never. In fact, she often complains that you're too sharp, too aware of the family dynamics, that you see through her attempts to... He stopped abruptly. Attempts to what, Patrick? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. To establish herself as the authority figure, to be seen as the successful one. He looked directly at me. Miranda has always felt she lives in your shadow, Margaret. Your success, your confidence, your relationship with the children. She wants to be the matriarch, not the daughter still seeking approval. This insight wasn't entirely surprising, but hearing it articulated so clearly brought a wave of sadness. I had never intended to overshadow Miranda. My support had always been offered with the hope of seeing her thrive. Have you noticed other concerning behaviors? I asked, beyond the restrictions regarding my visits? Patrick's expression turned guarded. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking if Miranda has been making choices that seem motivated by control rather than care. Decisions that prioritize appearance over substance. He was quiet for nearly a minute, clearly weighing his loyalty to his wife against growing concerns. Finally, he spoke in a lowered voice. The Homeowners Association has become an obsession. She's been hosting these elaborate dinner parties for board members and influential residents. We can't really afford them, but she insists they're necessary for community standing. He looked troubled. She's becoming fixated on who has access to the neighborhood, who belongs, who doesn't meet the community standards. And financially? I probed gently. Patrick's shoulders slumped slightly. My firm is doing well, but not as well as Miranda presents to others. The award brought prestige, but not immediate profits. We've been living beyond our means for months. He looked up, his expression both embarrassed and defiant. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to confirm your concerns about my ability to provide for the family. I've never doubted your abilities, Patrick, I said softly. Only your willingness to check Miranda's more extreme impulses. He winced at that. Fair enough. He tapped the conservatorship documents. Do you know who sent these? No, I answered honestly. but someone clearly felt I needed to be warned. Patrick nodded slowly. I suspect I know who. At my questioning, "Look," he explained, "Miranda's assistant at the foundation, Tessa. She's been uncomfortable with some of Miranda's recent behavior. She mentioned ethical concerns when she gave notice last week." That was valuable information. Tessa might be another potential ally, or at least a source of insight into Miranda's plans. "There's something else you should know," Patrick continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Miranda has been discussing a significant renovation of our home with a contractor. Premium materials, expanded footprint, high-end finishes. When I questioned how we would pay for it, she said not to worry, that soon we would have access to family resources that had been unnecessarily tied up." A chill ran through me. The implication was clear. Miranda was already planning how to spend my money once she gained control of it. "One last question," I said carefully. "Has Miranda ever mentioned anything about the ownership of Oakwood Estates? The subdivision itself?" Patrick looked puzzled. "Only that the development is managed by some investment group. She's complained, occasionally, about not being able to meet the actual owners to discuss her vision for community improvements." He studied my face. "Why do you ask?" I made a split-second decision. "Patrick, what I'm about to tell you must remain in absolute confidence. Not even the children can know yet." He straightened, his full attention engaged. "Of course. I own Oakwood Estates. All of it. The residential properties, the commercial spaces, the community center. Everything. I developed it 20 years ago through a separate LLC that deliberately keeps my name off public records." Patrick stared at me, stunned into silence. After several moments, he managed, "The entire subdivision? Miranda has no idea?" "No one does, except my attorney, Eleanor Thompson, and apparently Richard Chan from the homeowners board." I watched his face carefully. "And now, you." Patrick ran a hand through his hair, processing this revelation. "This changes everything," he said finally. If Miranda knew, she would either attempt to leverage it or resent me even more for having this power." I completed his thought. "Which is why I'm telling you in confidence. I need to know if I can trust you, Patrick. Not just with this information, but with helping me maintain my relationship with my grandchildren." He sat straighter, a new resoluteness in his expression. "The children need you in their lives, Margaret. I've always known that, even when I failed to stand up for it." He took a deep breath. "What do you need from me?" "First, advance. Notice of any legal moves Miranda makes regarding conservatorship. Second, regular updates about the children. And third," I leaned forward, "your support, or at least your neutrality, at Tuesday's homeowners meeting." "The visitation policy," Patrick nodded. "She's been lobbying hard for it." "Yes, I plan to attend and speak against it, not as the owner, but as a concerned community member with deep ties to the neighborhood." Patrick considered this, then nodded decisively. "I can do all three. But Margaret, you should know. If Miranda suspects I'm working with you, she might accelerate her plans. Then we'll need to be cautious," I agreed. "And Patrick, thank you for meeting me today." He gathered the conservatorship documents and handed them back to me. "These will disappear from her files tonight. It might buy us some time." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "The children were wearing jade pendants this morning. Sophie showed me hers, said it was a special secret from you." I tensed, uncertain how he would react to my circumvention of Miranda's gift restrictions. To my surprise, a small smile touched his lips. "Good. They need tangible reminders that you're still there for them." With that, he turned and left the coffee shop, walking with a slightly straighter posture than when he'd arrived. I remained at the table, contemplating our conversation. Patrick's support was a significant development, but it also increased the stakes. If Miranda discovered his involvement, it could fracture their marriage beyond repair, potentially harming the children in the process. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Tessa Martin, formerly Miranda's assistant. I believe we need to talk. Can we meet somewhere private?" Another piece moving on. The board. I responded immediately. "My home 4 p.m. today. The address is 127 Pinecrest Lane." On the drive home, I mentally recalibrated my strategy. With Patrick and potentially Tessa as allies, I had more information and influence than I'd initially realized. But Miranda's conservatorship plan represented a more immediate threat than I'd anticipated. Tuesday's homeowners meeting was no longer just about maintaining access to my grandchildren. It was about protecting my autonomy and assets from a daughter who seemed determined to control both. Tessa Martin arrived at my home precisely at 4, driving a modest sedan that she parked carefully on the street rather than in my driveway. A subtle precaution against being recognized by neighbors, who might report back to Miranda. She was younger than I expected, perhaps 30, with a practical bob haircut and the alert, efficient demeanor of someone accustomed to anticipating others' needs. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mrs. Wilson," she said as I welcomed her inside. "I apologize for the secrecy, but the situation is delicate." "I understand completely," I assured her, leading her to my sunroom where I'd prepared tea and a light arrangement of cookies. "And please, call me Margaret." Tessa settled onto the wicker sofa, her posture professional despite the informal setting. "I worked for your daughter for 3 years at the Portland Arts Foundation. Initially, it was a position I valued. Meaningful work, good experience." She paused. "But over the past 6 months, things changed significantly." "In what way?" I asked, pouring tea for both of us. "Miranda began using foundation resources for personal networking, directing me to handle private matters during work hours, asking me to adjust expense reports to cover personal lunches." Tessa accepted the teacup with a nod of thanks. "I raised concerns with the executive director, but Miranda is well connected. Nothing came of it." "What prompted your resignation?" Tessa's expression hardened. 3 weeks ago, Miranda asked me to compile information about you. Financial records, property holdings, medical history. She claimed it was for estate planning purposes, but the attorney she connected me with specialized in elder law and competency cases. When I questioned the approach, she became defensive, then threatening. "Threatening how?" I kept my voice neutral. "She implied my career in nonprofit administration would be over in Portland if I didn't cooperate." Tessa met my gaze directly. "I submitted my resignation the next day, but not before I made copies of the correspondence regarding the competency evaluation." "You sent the documents to Eleanor Thompson," I said. Not a question, but a confirmation. Tessa nodded. "I found her name in Miranda's contacts list as your friend. I thought she might be able to warn you discreetly." "Why take this risk? You don't know me personally." She carefully set down her teacup. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died. When I was in college, my uncle tried to have her declared incompetent to gain control of her modest savings. I've seen this playbook before, and I couldn't be part of it." Her personal connection to the situation explained her willingness to become involved. "I appreciate your integrity, Tessa. What else can you tell me about Miranda's plans?" "She's been coordinating with 3 specific board members of the Homeowners Association, Diane Abernathy, Martin Wells, and Victoria Simmons. They meet regularly to discuss what they call community standards enforcement." Tessa pulled a small notebook from her bag. "I have dates, topics, and proposed policy changes, including the visitor restrictions targeted at you." I recognized the other 2 names. Martin Wells was a retired banking executive who had moved to Oakwood Estates only 2 years ago, and Victoria Simmons was a real estate agent who had always been slightly too deferential to Miranda. Both would be present at Tuesday's meeting. There's more, Tessa continued. Miranda has been discussing property values and investment potential with these board members. She's particularly focused on the community center renovation as a way to justify significant increases in association fees. To what end? I wondered aloud. Based on what I overheard, they're trying to price out some of the original residents, the retirees and middle-income families who bought in early. They want to transform Oakwood into an exclusive enclave. Tessa looked troubled. Miranda specifically mentioned that certain elements were bringing down property values. The implications were disturbing. Miranda wasn't just trying to exclude me. She was attempting to reshape the entire community into a more elite, exclusive environment. The diverse, multi-generational neighborhood I'd carefully designed was being targeted for improvement by my own daughter. The meeting on Tuesday, I said. What do you know about their strategy? They plan to present the visitor policy as a security measure, citing recent property crimes in neighboring communities. The fee increases will be framed as necessary investments in community infrastructure. Tessa hesitated. And Miranda has prepared a statement about resident conduct standards that indirectly references disruptive family situations affecting community harmony. She's going to publicly suggest I'm creating family drama, I translated. Essentially, yes. Tessa looked apologetic. She's been quite strategic about building her support base. For the next hour, Tessa shared everything she knew about Miranda's plans, the allies she'd cultivated, the policies she hoped to implement, and the narrative she'd constructed about my supposedly declining judgment. The picture that emerged was of a daughter determined to assert control at any cost, using the Homeowners Association as a vehicle for her ambitions, while simultaneously laying groundwork to seize my assets. As our meeting concluded, I walked Tessa to the door. Thank you for taking this risk, I said sincerely. You've provided invaluable information. She straightened her shoulders. I believe in doing what's right, even when it's difficult. My grandmother raised me that way. She handed me a business card. I've included my personal contact information. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to help. After Tessa departed, I immediately called Eleanor to update her on both conversations. Her response was characteristically direct. Miranda has overplayed her hand, she declared firmly. The conservatorship attempt is legally dubious given your obvious competence, and her homeowners association manipulation would collapse instantly if your ownership were revealed. But revealing my ownership is a nuclear option, I reminded her. It would destroy any chance of reconciliation with Miranda. Is reconciliation still your goal? Eleanor challenged gently. Or is protecting your grandchildren and your assets from her controlling behavior more important now? It was a fair question. My initial objective had been to maintain my relationship with my grandchildren while preserving family harmony. But Miranda's conservatorship plan changed the equation. Significantly, she wasn't just being overprotective, she was actively plotting to seize control of my finances under false pretenses. I need to think strategically, I said finally. Tuesday's meeting is the immediate concern. If I can defeat the visitor restriction policy without revealing my ownership, that creates breathing room to address the conservatorship threat separately. And if you can't, Eleanor pressed, then I'll need to be prepared to use every advantage at my disposal, I acknowledged, including ownership disclosure if necessary. That evening, I spent hours reviewing the documents Tessa had provided, cross-referencing them with the property records for Oakwood Estates and the original community charter I had established. The governing documents contained several provisions that Miranda and her allies appeared unaware of, provisions that could be pivotal in Tuesday's confrontation. My phone rang just after 9 o'clock. It was Patrick, his voice tense and hushed. "Margaret, I can't talk long. Miranda just left for an emergency board meeting at Diane Abernathy's house. Something's happened that's accelerated their timeline. My grip tightened on the phone. What prompted this? Richard Chan called her, apparently quite agitated. I only heard Miranda's side, but it sounded like he raised objections to the visitor policy, and she's trying to shore up support before Tuesday. He paused. She mentioned your name several times. Said something about needing to neutralize the situation before you could cause problems. Is she still pursuing the conservatorship? I asked directly. I searched her office after our meeting, Patrick confirmed. The documents are gone. She must have digital copies or they're stored elsewhere. But I found a calendar entry for next Monday with a Dr. Harris. The note says, Competency Evaluation Strategy. This was moving faster than I'd anticipated. Monday is the day before the homeowners meeting. She's trying to undermine my credibility. Exactly. And Margaret? His voice dropped even lower. Emma overheard part of Miranda's phone conversation. She came to me afterward, very upset, asking why Mom was saying mean things about Grandma. The children are beginning to notice the situation. My heart ached for my grandchildren, caught in this painful dynamic. Thank you for telling me, Patrick. Keep the children as insulated as possible. I'll handle the rest. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened living room watching the lights of houses in the subdivision below. In one of those homes, my daughter was actively plotting against me, gathering allies to cut me off from my grandchildren and seize control of my assets. The betrayal cut deeply, but beneath the pain, a cold resolve was forming. I had spent my life building security, financial, emotional, communal. I had created Oakwood Estates as a legacy, a place where families like mine could thrive in a supportive environment. I would not allow that vision to be corrupted, nor would I permit myself to be cast aside by the daughter I had always supported. The time for gentle persuasion had passed. Miranda had escalated this conflict, and now I needed to respond with appropriate force, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity to protect myself, my grandchildren, and the community I had built. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard Chan's number. As a board member who knew my ownership status, he would be a crucial ally in the coming confrontation. Mrs. Wilson, he answered immediately, his tone apologetic. I was about to call you. Things have taken an unfortunate turn. I'm aware, I said calmly. I understand there's an emergency board meeting happening now. Yes, Miranda is attempting to fast-track the visitor restriction policy for approval before Tuesday's public meeting. She's framing it as a security emergency that can't wait for community input. He sounded troubled. I objected on procedural grounds, which is why I'm not at the meeting. My absence prevents them from having the quorum needed for official action. A strategic move on his part. Thank you for that, Richard. But this situation requires more than procedural delays. I think it's time to be more direct about certain realities. You mean revealing your ownership? He sounded uncertain. That's a significant step, Mrs. Wilson. Perhaps. But sometimes the most powerful move in chess is the one your opponent never saw coming. I outlined my preliminary plan for Tuesday's meeting. Can I count on your support? After a moment's consideration, he agreed. Yes, the community charter is quite clear about the original vision for Oakwood Estates. What Miranda and her allies are proposing contradicts both the letter and spirit of those founding principles. We spoke for another 20 minutes, refining our approach for Tuesday. By the time we concluded the call, I had the beginning of a strategy that would allow me to counter Miranda's moves without immediately revealing my ownership, though I would be prepared to do so if necessary. Next, I called James Foster, the Homeowners Association president, ostensibly to inquire about attending Tuesday's meeting as a concerned community member. Our conversation was revealing. Of course you're welcome to attend, Margaret, he assured me. Though I should mention there's been some discussion About the visitor policy proposal. What kind of discussion? I prompted. He hesitated. Some board members feel it's necessary for security reasons. Others, myself included, question whether it's an appropriate restriction on property owners' rights to have family visitors. And where does the board currently stand? I asked innocently. Divided, he admitted. But Miranda has been very persistent. She's framing it as protection for families with young children. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. I understand. There may be some personal considerations. In this case, so Miranda had already begun spreading her narrative about me being a problematic influence. I see, I said neutrally. Well, I look forward to sharing my perspective as a longtime community member on Tuesday. After ending the call, I made one final decision. It was time to speak directly with the person at the center of this conflict. My daughter. I sent Miranda a simple text message. I know about the conservatorship plan and the emergency board meeting tonight. We need to talk before Tuesday. Your choice of time and place. Mom. Her response came nearly an hour later, past midnight. My office at the foundation, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. The directness of her message confirmed what I already suspected. Miranda was no longer pretending. The conflict between us had moved into the open, and tomorrow would be our first direct confrontation. As I prepared for bed, I checked my email one last time and found a message from Eleanor with a subject line that made my breath catch. Competency Evaluation Documentation. She had obtained copies of the forms Miranda had prepared for Dr. Harris, including a detailed narrative of my supposedly concerning behaviors. According to Miranda's account, I was exhibiting paranoid tendencies, excessive fixation on the grandchildren, reckless financial decisions, and inappropriate interference in family boundaries. She had carefully constructed a case designed to raise red flags with any evaluating physician, particularly one who was only hearing her version of events. The calculated nature of her approach left me both heartbroken and coldly furious. This was my daughter, whom I had raised alone after Robert's death, whom I had supported through college and early marriage, whose family I had helped establish in a beautiful home in a community I had built myself. And now she was attempting to declare me incompetent to gain control of my assets and permanently sever my bond with my grandchildren. Tomorrow's meeting would not be an attempt at reconciliation. It would be a confrontation between two women who had fundamentally different understandings of family, power, and respect. I needed to be prepared for anything Miranda might say or do, and I needed to be ready to defend myself with whatever tools were necessary. As I finally closed my eyes that night, I reminded myself that this fight wasn't just about my relationship with Miranda. It was about protecting my grandchildren from her controlling behavior, preserving my financial autonomy, and safeguarding the inclusive community vision that had guided the development of Oakwood Estates. Some battles were worth fighting, no matter how painful. This was one of them. The Portland Arts Foundation occupied a renovated Victorian mansion in the city's cultural district. In the early morning light, the building's ornate facade seemed almost theatrical, an appropriate setting for the confrontation ahead. I arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing to wait in my car across the street, observing the entrance. At precisely 8:45, Miranda pulled up in her silver Audi, dressed in a tailored burgundy pantsuit that projected authority and control. I gave her 5 minutes to settle into her office before crossing the street. The foundation hadn't officially opened for the day, and the reception area was empty. A sign on the desk indicated the receptionist would return at 9 a.m. I knew the way to Miranda's office. I had visited several times in the early days of her appointment to the board, before our relationship had deteriorated to its current state. The door to her corner office was slightly ajar. I knocked once and entered without waiting for a response, a small assertion of my own authority in what I knew would be a power-laden interaction. Miranda was seated behind her desk, a sleek glass and steel construction that matched the modernist art on the walls, all carefully curated to project contemporary sophistication. She looked up from her computer screen, her expression composed but cold. "Mother," she acknowledged, not rising to greet me. "Please close the door." I did so, then took a seat across from her without being invited. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Miranda leaned back slightly, her posture deliberately relaxed though her eyes remained vigilant. "Your message was concerning. Accusations about conservatorship plans, emergency meetings. You sound paranoid." The word choice wasn't accidental. Paranoia was prominently featured in the competency evaluation documentation she had prepared. "Not accusations, Miranda. Facts." I placed a folder on her desk and opened it to reveal copies of her emails with the elder law attorney. These were anonymously delivered to Eleanor. "Quite detailed plans you've been making about my supposed mental decline." Her expression flickered briefly, surprise, then anger, quickly controlled. She glanced at the documents, then back at me. "Going through my private communications? That only confirms my concerns about your behavior." Her voice was calm, professional, the tone she likely used when dealing with difficult board members. "Mother, I've been consulting experts because I'm genuinely worried about your judgment lately. The fixation on the children, the undermining of our parental authority, the financially irresponsible gifts." "Financially irresponsible?" I repeated with a raised eyebrow. "Jade pendants and educational books hardly qualify as extravagance." Miranda's eyes narrowed slightly. "So you admit circumventing our explicit boundaries regarding gifts, after I specifically told you—" "After you threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren entirely if I didn't comply with your arbitrary rules," I interrupted, keeping my voice steady. "Yes, I gave them small, meaningful gifts. That's hardly evidence of mental decline." "It's evidence of boundary violations," she countered. "And it's not just the gifts. It's your increasing interference in our family decisions, your emotional manipulation of the children, your refusal to acknowledge that Patrick and I are the parents, not you." I studied my daughter's face, the determined set of her jaw, the defensive posture, the carefully constructed narrative she had created to justify her actions. In that moment, I saw with painful clarity how Miranda had reframed our entire relationship to support her current agenda. My support had become interference. My love for my grandchildren had become manipulation. My financial acumen had become a threat to her authority. "Miranda," I said quietly, "why are you really doing this? Is this truly about the children's welfare, or is it about something else?" She stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What are you implying?" "I'm asking directly," I corrected. "Is this about protecting the children from some imagined harm I might cause? Or is it about controlling access to resources, both emotional and financial?" "That's absurd," she dismissed, but a slight flush had risen to her cheeks. "We're establishing healthy family boundaries and ensuring you receive appropriate care as you age." "Appropriate care," I repeated. "Such as having my financial autonomy stripped away through a manufactured competency evaluation? Scheduled for Monday, I believe, with Dr. Harris." This time, Miranda couldn't conceal her shock. Her eyes widened momentarily before she regained control. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting myself," I countered, "just as you claim to be protecting your family. The difference is, Miranda, I'm responding to real actions you've taken, not invented scenarios about declining mental capacity." Miranda stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the foundation's manicured gardens. When she spoke again, her voice had hardened. "You've always thought you knew best. Always been so certain of your superior wisdom, your financial brilliance, your perfect grandmothering." She turned to face me. "Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up in the shadow of Margaret Wilson, financial genius? To have every decision questioned, every achievement measured against your standard? So there it was, the long simmering, resentment finally surfacing. I never intended to overshadow you, Miranda. I was trying to give you advantages I never had. Advantages? She laughed harshly. You call it advantage, I call it control. The trust fund with conditions, the reduced price on a house in your preferred neighborhood, the constant advice on everything from investments to how we should raise our children. I've only wanted to help, I said softly. Help that always comes with strings attached, she retorted. Help that ensures we remain dependent on your goodwill. Help that positions you as the wise matriarch and me as the inadequate daughter who can't possibly succeed without Margaret Wilson's guidance. The bitterness in her voice was startling. Had she truly interpreted all my support as manipulation? Had my attempts to provide security for her family actually fostered this deep resentment? Miranda, if you felt this way, why not speak with me directly? Why resort to legal maneuvers and community policies designed to exclude me? She returned to her desk, sitting down with deliberate composure. Because you don't listen, Mother. You never have. You hear what you want to hear and dismiss the rest as misunderstanding or overreaction. There was perhaps a grain of truth in this accusation that I needed to acknowledge. I'm listening now, I said quietly. Tell me what you want. Miranda studied me for a moment, seemingly weighing whether my offer was genuine. I want autonomy, she said finally. Real autonomy, not the illusion of it while you pull strings behind the scenes. I want to raise my children according to my values, not yours. I want to build my own life, make my own mistakes, without your constant presence reminding everyone that I'm still Margaret Wilson's daughter. And you believe cutting me off from my grandchildren and seizing control of my finances will achieve this autonomy? I asked carefully. I believe establishing clear boundaries is necessary, she replied, her professional mask firmly back in place. The children need consistency and clear parental authority. Your financial resources should be properly managed to ensure your long-term care, not frittered away on excessive gifts or risky investments. I recognize the rehearsed quality of this statement, language likely borrowed from the elder law, attorney or family therapist she'd been consulting. But beneath the practiced phrases, I heard the wounded child still seeking to establish her independence from a mother she perceived as controlling. Miranda, I said gently, I understand your desire for autonomy. Truly, I do. But there are better ways to achieve it than what you're attempting now. Such as? Her tone was skeptical. Direct communication, family therapy if necessary, reasonable boundaries that don't involve eliminating me from the children's lives or seizing control of my financial decisions. I leaned forward slightly. What you're doing now, the conservatorship plan, the homeowners association manipulation, it's not just harmful to me, it's potentially damaging to the children, to your relationship with Patrick, to your own integrity. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before her expression hardened again. Patrick supports me in this. He understands the importance of unified parenting. Does he? I asked mildly. Have you discussed the conservatorship plan with him? The Monday appointment with Dr. Harris? Her hesitation was brief but telling. Patrick trusts my judgment regarding family matters. And regarding your emergency board meeting last night? The attempt to fast-track the visitor restriction policy without community input? The slight widening of her eyes confirmed she hadn't expected me to know these details. The homeowners association business is separate from our personal issues, she said dismissively. That policy is about community security, not just you. Miranda, I said with gentle firmness, this deception needs to stop. You're not just hurting me. You're hurting yourself and your family with these machinations. Her face flushed with anger. Don't you dare lecture me about family values. Not when you've been undermining my authority with my own children for years. I've loved them, I corrected. There's a difference. Not the way you do it, she snapped. Every gift, every special outing, every secret conversation. It's all designed to position you as the fun, generous grandma while Patrick and I are the strict, boring parents who set limits. That's not my intent. Intent doesn't matter. Miranda's professional composure finally cracked. The effect is what matters. And the effect of your constant presence, your constant opinions, your constant financial assistance that we never asked for is that I can never establish myself as the head of my own family. Her outburst left a ringing silence in the office. I waited a moment, giving her time to regain her composure before responding. I understand that you feel undermined, I said quietly. And perhaps I have overstepped at times, with good intentions, but harmful impact. I can acknowledge that and work to change it. But what you're doing now, attempting to have me declared incompetent, manipulating community policies to exclude me, that's not about establishing healthy boundaries. That's about control and punishment. Miranda's expression closed like a shutter. You can frame it however you want, Mother. The fact remains that my children need protection from your excessive influence, and your finances need protection from your declining judgment. I realized then that this conversation was not going to yield reconciliation. Miranda was too entrenched in her narrative, too committed to her course of action to consider alternative perspectives. The time for gentle persuasion had passed. I see, I said, gathering my folder and standing. Then I believe we have nothing more to discuss until Tuesday's homeowners meeting. The visitor restriction policy is likely to pass, Miranda said confidently. I have sufficient support on the board. I regarded her steadily. Perhaps. But community policies require community input, Miranda, and I believe the residents of Oakwood Estates might have some interesting perspectives to contribute. Something? In my tone must have alerted her because her eyes narrowed slightly. What are you planning? Planning? I echoed innocently. I'm simply exercising my right as a community member to participate in governance discussions. Isn't that what you're doing with your emergency board meetings and carefully cultivated allies? This isn't a game, Mother, she said sharply. No, I agreed, moving toward the door. It's not. It's about family, community, and respect. Things that can't be controlled through legal maneuvers or policy revisions, no matter how cleverly constructed. I paused at the threshold, looking back at my daughter, professional, poised, and so very determined to assert control at any cost. One last thing, Miranda. The appointment with Dr. Harris on Monday? I suggest you cancel it. False claims of mental incompetence can have serious legal consequences. Before she could respond, I closed the door behind me and walked through the empty reception area, my steps echoing in the quiet building. The confrontation had gone largely as I'd expected. Miranda remained committed to her course of action, unmoved by appeals to family harmony or ethical considerations, which meant I needed to move forward with more decisive countermeasures. Outside, the morning had brightened into a clear autumn day. I checked my watch, 9:45 a.m., plenty of time before my next scheduled meeting. I reached for my phone and called. Patrick. How did it go? He asked immediately. About as expected, I replied, walking toward my car. She's not backing down. In fact, she seems more determined than ever to proceed with both the conservatorship and the visitor restriction policy. Patrick sighed heavily. I was afraid of that. She came home late last night from Diane's meeting, absolutely furious that Richard hadn't attended. She was up half the night sending emails and making calls. She's building her coalition for Tuesday, I observed. And she mentioned you specifically, Patrick. Said you fully support her actions, including the conservatorship plan. His response was immediate and vehement. That's absolutely false. I've told her repeatedly that restricting your access to the children is harmful to everyone involved. As for the conservatorship, He broke off abruptly. "What is it?" "She's calling me." "Right now," he said, voice lowered. "She must have just finished with you. I should take this, maintain the appearance that everything's normal." "Of course," I agreed. "One quick question. Will you be at Tuesday's meeting?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Miranda wants the entire family there to present a united front, including the children." That was an unexpected development. "She's bringing Emma, Lucas, and Sophie to a potentially contentious community meeting?" "She says it's important they see community governance in action," Patrick said, his skepticism evident. "But between us, I think she wants to use their presence to discourage open opposition. Who would want to argue against policy changes? With children watching? A manipulative tactic, but potentially effective." "Thank you for the warning. I need to adjust my approach accordingly." "I should go," Patrick said quickly. "Her call is coming through again. I'll update you if anything significant changes." After hanging up, I drove directly to Eleanor's house. We had arranged to meet with Richard Chan to finalize our strategy for Tuesday's meeting, and this new information about the children's attendance required careful consideration. Eleanor's Mediterranean-style home was one of the most distinctive in Oakwood Estates, with its terracotta roof and lush courtyard garden. Richard had already arrived by the time I got there, and Eleanor had set up an impromptu strategy session in her sunroom, complete with easel paper for mapping out our approach. "Miranda is bringing the grandchildren to the meeting," I announced without preamble as I joined them, "apparently to discourage open opposition." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Using children as emotional shields. Charming." Richard looked troubled. "That complicates matters. We were planning some rather direct challenges to the policy proposals." "We'll need to adjust our approach," I agreed, accepting the coffee Eleanor offered. "But this doesn't change our fundamental strategy, just how we present it." For the next 2 hours, we refined our plan for Tuesday's meeting, carefully considering how to effectively counter Miranda's proposals while maintaining an appropriate tone given the children's presence. Richard provided invaluable insider perspective on board dynamics and procedural requirements, while Eleanor contributed sharp legal insights regarding the community charter and property rights. By noon, we had developed a comprehensive strategy that would allow us to block the visitor restriction policy without immediately revealing my ownership of the subdivision. We would focus on the community charter's explicit language regarding inclusivity and multi-generational support, provisions I had carefully crafted 20 years ago specifically to prevent the kind of exclusive, restrictive environment Miranda was now attempting to create. This approach gives Miranda one final opportunity to reconsider her position without public embarrassment, I explained, reviewing our outlined plan. If she persists, despite these procedural and charter-based objections, then we move to phase 2. "Are you prepared for that possibility?" Eleanor asked gently. "Once your ownership is revealed, your relationship with Miranda may be irreparably damaged." I nodded slowly. "I've been considering that reality since yesterday. If Miranda forces that outcome through her own actions, I'll have to accept it. My priority now is protecting myself legally and financially, while maintaining my relationship with my grandchildren." Richard glanced at his watch. "I should go. I have a lunch meeting with James Foster, an opportunity to ensure the association. President understands the procedural irregularities of yesterday's emergency session." After Richard left, Eleanor and I moved to her kitchen where she prepared a light lunch of soup and sandwiches. As we ate, she regarded me thoughtfully. "You seem different today, Maggie. More resolved." I considered this observation. My conversation with Miranda this morning clarified things. She truly believes I've been controlling and manipulative throughout her life, that my financial support and involvement with the grandchildren are about maintaining power rather than expressing love. "That's a significant misreading of your intentions," Eleanor noted. "Perhaps, but there's always some truth in these perceptions." I stirred my soup contemplatively. I've been thinking about how I may have contributed to this dynamic without realizing it. My desire to provide security, to shield Miranda from financial struggles, may have inadvertently undermined her sense of autonomy. That doesn't justify her current actions, Eleanor pointed out. No, it doesn't. But understanding the roots of her resentment helps me approach this conflict more clearly. I set down my spoon. I still hope for eventual reconciliation, Eleanor. But I recognize that may not be possible until Miranda works through her own issues regarding independence and control. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I protect myself, maintain my relationship with my grandchildren as best I can, and ensure Oakwood Estates remains the inclusive, supportive community I designed it to be. I smiled slightly. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set clear boundaries, a lesson Miranda ironically taught me. After lunch, I returned home to find a message from Tessa Martin indicating she had gathered additional documentation regarding Miranda's plans. We arranged to meet later that afternoon at a cafe outside the subdivision to avoid attracting attention. The remainder of the day passed in careful preparation, reviewing community bylaws, gathering historical documents about Oakwood Estates development, and reaching out to key residents who might provide testimonials about the importance of family visitation in the community. By evening, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier that would effectively counter Miranda's security-based arguments for visitor restrictions. As I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky above the subdivision I had created, my phone chimed with a message from Lucas, a rare direct communication given Miranda's recent restrictions. Grandma, Mom says we're going to an important meeting on Tuesday. Will you be there? Emma is worried about something but won't tell me what. I crafted my response carefully. Yes, I'll be at the meeting. Tell Emma not to worry. Sometimes adults have different opinions about community rules, but that doesn't change how much I love all of you. His reply came quickly. Mom's been acting weird. She and Dad had a big fight after she got home today. She kept saying your name. This confirmed my suspicion that Miranda had confronted Patrick after our meeting, perhaps accusing him of leaking information to me. Adults sometimes disagree, I responded, but I'm sure your parents both love you very much. See you Tuesday, sweetheart. I had just set down my phone when headlights swept across my front yard. A car had pulled into my driveway, Miranda's silver Audi. This was unexpected and concerning, given our confrontational meeting this morning. I moved to the front door, watching through the side window as Miranda sat in her car for several long moments, seemingly gathering herself before finally emerging. Her posture was rigid, her expression tightly controlled as she approached my porch. I opened the door before she could knock. Miranda, this is a surprise. Her eyes were hard, her voice clipped. We need to talk. Now. I stepped aside to let her enter, noting the barely contained fury in her movements. What's happened? Miranda strode into my living room, then turned to face me. Patrick told me everything. Your little coffee shop meeting, the jade pendants for the children, your claims about my conservatorship plans. So Patrick had confessed our conversation, either voluntarily or under pressure. I see, I said calmly. And? She repeated incredulously. And you've been manipulating my husband behind my back, turning him against me with distortions and accusations. I shared documented facts with Patrick, I corrected. Facts you had deliberately concealed from him, such as your appointment with Dr. Harris on Monday. Miranda's face flushed. That appointment is now canceled, thanks to your interference. The elder law attorney has also withdrawn from our consultations, citing ethical concerns. Her eyes narrowed accusingly. You've been very busy undermining my efforts to protect this family. Is that how you see it? I asked, maintaining my composure. As protection rather than control? Don't try your reasonable tone with me, she snapped. I know exactly what you're doing. You're threatened by my independence, by my authority as a parent, by my position in the community. You can't stand not being the most important person in everyone's life. The projection was so clear it might have been comical under different circumstances. Miranda, I'm not finished, she interrupted sharply. You think you've won because the conservatorship plan has hit a roadblock, but you haven't. The visitor restriction policy will pass on Tuesday. I have the votes secured. And once that's in place, you'll have no legal right to enter Oakwood Estates without my explicit invitation. I regarded her steadily. You seem very confident about the outcome of a community vote that hasn't happened yet. Because I understand how influence works, she retorted. Something I learned from watching you all these years. The difference is, I'm using that influence to protect my family, not control everyone around me. I recognized the futility of arguing with Miranda. In her current state, she had constructed a narrative where her actions were justified as protection, while mine were condemned as manipulation. No amount of reasonable discussion would penetrate that defensive framework tonight. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with this visit? I asked directly. I'm warning you, she said, her voice lowering. Stay away from Patrick. Stay away from my children. And do not attempt to disrupt Tuesday's meeting with your desperate attempts to maintain control over this family and community. Or what, Miranda? I kept my tone gentle despite the implied threat. Or I will take more decisive action, she replied coldly. The conservatorship plan may be temporarily delayed, but there are other legal avenues to protect vulnerable, elderly individuals from their own poor decisions. The threat was clear, if somewhat vague in its specifics. I see, I said quietly. Thank you for making your position so explicit. My calm response seemed to further infuriate her. This isn't over, Mother, not by a long shot. With that, she turned and strode toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. One more thing, I've instructed the children not to speak with you at Tuesday's meeting. Any attempt to approach them will be considered a hostile action. After she left, the house felt suddenly silent and empty. I moved to the window, watching her car's taillights disappear down the street toward her home in the heart of the subdivision I had built, and she was now attempting to weaponize against me. Miranda's unexpected visit had accomplished one thing. It had eliminated any remaining doubt about the necessity of my prepared countermeasures. Her explicit threats confirmed that she would not be deterred by reason, empathy, or appeals to family harmony. She was fully committed to her course of action, regardless of the potential damage to our relationship or the children's emotional well-being. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Richard Chan. Miranda just left my house. She's escalating. Proceed with all preparations for Tuesday. No holds barred. His response came moments later. Understood. All documentation ready. Legal. Team on standby. Next, I called Eleanor. Miranda knows about my meeting with Patrick, I explained after recounting the confrontation. She's made explicit threats regarding further legal action if I attempt to oppose the visitor restriction policy. That's both unfortunate and helpful, Eleanor observed. Unfortunate for family harmony, but helpful in that it justifies our more comprehensive response on Tuesday. Exactly, I agreed. I'd hoped to avoid revealing my ownership of the subdivision, but Miranda's actions have eliminated that option. She's determined to use the homeowners association as a weapon against me, and I can't allow that precedent to be established, not just for my sake, but for the community as a whole. Have you considered the impact this will have on your grandchildren? Eleanor asked gently. They'll be present for what's likely to be a significant public confrontation between you and their mother. I had been wrestling with this concern since learning the children would attend. I've been thinking about that all afternoon. I'll need to approach this carefully, firm about the policy issues but without personal attacks on Miranda. The children shouldn't witness their grandmother and mother in an acrimonious public battle. A delicate balance, Eleanor acknowledged. But if anyone can maintain that line, it's you, Maggie. After we ended the call, I sat in my study reviewing the community charter one final time, highlighting the specific provisions that directly contradicted Miranda's proposed restrictions. The document's opening preamble, which I had personally written 20 years ago, stated explicitly, Oakwood Estates is established as an inclusive, multi-generational community that values family connections, neighborhood engagement, and diverse perspectives. Those words would be central to Tuesday's confrontation, a reminder of the founding vision for this community that Miranda was now attempting to reshape in her own restrictive image. As midnight approached, I received one final message, from Patrick this time. I'm sorry. Miranda went through my phone while I was showering, saw your messages, confronted me. Had to acknowledge our meeting. Trying to keep peace here for the children's sake. Still supporting you Tuesday, but will have to be subtle. I responded simply, understood. Protect the children first. Everything else is secondary. That night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself studying my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The silver hair I had earned through decades of hard work, the subtle lines around my eyes from both laughter and worry, the determined set of my jaw that Miranda had inherited despite her different coloring. At 72, I had hoped to be enjoying retirement, spending time with my grandchildren, and watching my family thrive. Instead, I was engaged in a complex legal and community battle with my own daughter, a conflict that had revealed painful truths about our relationship and her perception of my role in her life. Yet despite the heartache of this situation, I felt a curious sense of clarity and purpose. Miranda's actions had forced me to defend not just my relationship with my grandchildren, but my financial autonomy, my reputation, and the inclusive community vision I had worked so hard to create. Tuesday's Homeowners Association meeting would be more than a procedural discussion about visitor policies. It would be a reckoning, a public confrontation between competing visions for both family dynamics and community governance. Miranda had cast the die with her threats and machinations, seemingly confident in her victory. What she didn't realize was that her every move had only strengthened my resolve and clarified my strategy. By Tuesday evening, the power dynamics of Oakwood Estates would be irrevocably changed, and my daughter would finally understand that undermining Margaret Wilson had been a serious miscalculation. Tuesday evening arrived with an unusual energy in the Oakwood Estates Community Center. By 6:30, 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, the parking lot was already filled beyond capacity, with cars lining the adjacent streets. Word had spread about the controversial visitor restriction policy, drawing residents who rarely attended community governance meetings. I deliberately arrived early, positioning myself near the entrance to observe the arriving families. Eleanor accompanied me, carrying a leather portfolio containing all our documentation. Richard Chan had entered separately, maintaining the appearance of neutrality as he set up the board table at the front of the room. Quite the turnout, Eleanor murmured, surveying the growing crowd. Miranda's aggressive campaigning seems to have backfired by drawing more attention than she intended. I nodded, noting the clusters of residents engaged in animated conversations. People don't appreciate having significant policy changes rush through without proper consultation. At precisely 6:45, Miranda arrived with Patrick and the children, in tow. Emma walked slightly apart from her parents, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes darted around the room anxiously. Lucas stuck close to Patrick, while Sophie clutched her father's hand, clearly uncomfortable with the unfamiliar evening activity. Miranda had dressed for impact in a structured navy suit that projected authority, her hair swept into an elegant updo. She acknowledged various supporters with practiced smiles as she guided her family toward the front row of seats that had been reserved for them. When she spotted me near the entrance, her smile faltered momentarily before she deliberately turned away, leaning down to whisper something to Sophie. I noticed with a pang that all three children wore their school clothes, rather than the casual outfits they'd typically choose for an evening activity. Another subtle assertion of Miranda's control over their presentation. Patrick met my gaze, briefly as they passed, giving a nearly imperceptible nod. His expression was strained, suggesting the days since Miranda's discovery of our meeting had been difficult at home. Emma also glanced my way, her eyes conveying a mixture of confusion and distress before Miranda firmly guided her forward. By 7 o'clock, the community center was filled beyond its usual capacity. James Foster called the meeting to order with visible discomfort, clearly aware of the tension permeating the room. "Good evening, everyone," he began, adjusting his reading glasses. "We have quite the turnout tonight, which speaks to the community's engagement with these important issues. Our agenda includes several items, but I understand there's particular interest in the proposed visitor restriction policy." Miranda leaned forward in her seat, prepared to take control of the discussion. Before she could speak, Richard Chan intervened smoothly. "Mr. President, if I may suggest, given the significant community interest, perhaps we should move directly to the visitor policy discussion rather than following our usual agenda order." James nodded gratefully. "That seems sensible. The proposal, as circulated to homeowners yesterday, would establish new guidelines regarding non-resident visitors to Oakwood Estates." Miranda rose immediately, moving to the podium with practiced confidence. "Thank you, Mr. President. As chair of the Security Committee, I'd like to present the rationale for this important policy change." She launched into a carefully crafted presentation, framing the visitor restrictions as essential protection against unspecified security concerns in neighboring communities. Her language was deliberately vague, yet alarming, creating a sense of potential threat without providing specific incidents or data. The proposed policy would require all non-resident visitors to register with the Homeowners Association, limit visits to no more than 3 consecutive days without special approval, and establish community-wide quiet hours during which visitor activities would be restricted, she explained with professional authority. I watched the audience as she spoke, noting the skeptical expressions on many residents' faces. Despite Miranda's attempts to frame this as a security measure, the restrictive nature of the policy was evident to most. While this may seem stringent, to some, Miranda continued, we must prioritize the safety and tranquility of our community, particularly for families with young children. She gestured meaningfully toward her own children in the front row, a calculated move to associate her proposal with family protection. When Miranda concluded, James Foster opened the floor for discussion. Several of Miranda's allies spoke, first echoing her security concerns with similarly vague references to troubling incidents in the broader area. Diane Abernathy emphasized the need for greater oversight of who enters our community, while Martin Wells suggested the policy would maintain property values by ensuring appropriate community standards. Then Richard Chan recognized Eleanor, who rose with dignified composure. "Thank you," Eleanor began. "I've lived in Oakwood Estates for 15 years, and what has always distinguished this community is its welcoming, family-oriented atmosphere. The proposed visitor restrictions fundamentally contradict that character." Miranda's expression tightened as Eleanor continued, methodically dismantling the security justification with crime statistics showing no significant increase in neighborhood incidents. Several residents nodded in agreement, murmuring among themselves. Moreover, Eleanor concluded, this policy would have a disproportionate impact on extended families, particularly grandparents who provide childcare and support to resident families. Is this really the direction we want for Oakwood Estates? Her pointed question hung in the air, resonating with many in the room. I noticed Sophie whispering something to Patrick, who bent to listen before glancing uncomfortably at Miranda. James Foster cleared his throat. "Thank you for those perspectives. Are there other community members who wish to speak?" I rose slowly, feeling Miranda's gaze fix on me with cold intensity as I moved toward the podium. The room quieted as I took my position, adjusting the microphone slightly. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I've been connected to Oakwood Estates since its inception 20 years ago." Miranda's eyes narrowed at this phrasing, but I continued without acknowledging her reaction. "The proposed visitor restriction policy concerns me deeply, not just as someone with family in this community, but as someone who cares about what Oakwood Estates represents." I gestured toward the framed community charter hanging on the wall. "Our founding document explicitly describes this neighborhood as an inclusive, multi-generational community that values family connections." I turned slightly to address the board directly. "This proposed policy directly contradicts those foundational principles. It would restrict grandparents from regular involvement with their grandchildren, limit extended family gatherings, and create an atmosphere of exclusion rather than inclusion." Several residents nodded in agreement, including Catherine Fleming, the young mother whose twins I had sent developmental toys. From the corner of my eye, I could see Miranda shifting restlessly in her seat, clearly impatient to counter my arguments. "Beyond the philosophical concerns," I continued, "there are procedural issues that must be addressed. The emergency session held Sunday night to fast-track this policy violated several provisions of the community bylaws, including proper notice requirements and quorum standards." A murmur ran through the crowd. Many residents were hearing about this irregular process for the first time. Miranda leaned over to whisper something urgently to Diane Abernathy, who frowned in response. "Finally," I said, my voice softening slightly, "I would ask everyone to consider the real-world impact of this policy. When we speak about non-resident visitors, we're talking about grandparents who read bedtime stories, aunts and uncles who attend soccer games, and family friends who enrich our children's lives. Do we really want to regulate these relationships through registration requirements and time limits?" I deliberately caught Patrick's eye as I mentioned soccer games, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Emma was watching me intently, her expression thoughtful rather than confused now. Even Lucas seemed to be listening carefully, though Sophie had dozed off against her father's shoulder. "Thank you for your consideration," I concluded, returning to my seat beside Eleanor. Miranda immediately rose to respond, her composed demeanor now showing cracks of frustration. While Ms. Wilson's concerns about family connections are understandable, they represent an outdated perspective that prioritizes unlimited access over necessary security measures. The dismissive reference to me as Ms. Wilson, rather than my mother, or even Mrs. Wilson, was not lost on the audience. Several residents exchanged glances at this conspicuous distancing. Furthermore, Miranda continued with increasing intensity. "The procedural objections are merely technical details that don't invalidate the importance of this policy. Our emergency session was necessary to address immediate concerns." Richard Chan interrupted politely but firmly. "Point of order, Mr. President. The bylaws explicitly state that emergency sessions require documented urgent circumstances and two-thirds board attendance. Neither condition was met on Sunday." Miranda's face flushed with anger at this public contradiction from a fellow board member. "The urgency was clearly explained in my memo to the board, which cited no specific incidents or data," Richard countered calmly. "And with my absence, the quorum requirement wasn't satisfied." James Foster looked increasingly uncomfortable with this open disagreement among board members. "Perhaps we should take a step back and reconsider the procedural aspects before moving to a vote." "That's simply a delay tactic," Miranda insisted, her professional veneer slipping further. "This policy has strong support from key community members. We should proceed with the vote as planned." An elderly resident in the back row stood up without being recognized. "I'd like to know exactly who these key community members are," he called out. "Because most of us are hearing about these changes for the first time, and they don't sound like improvements to me." A chorus of agreement rippled through the room. Miranda looked momentarily taken aback by this open challenge from an unexpected quarter. She glanced at her allies on the board, but even Diane Abernathy seemed hesitant now. "Mr. President," I said, rising again, "given the procedural concerns and apparent community skepticism, I move that we table this proposal pending proper review and broader consultation." "I second that motion," Eleanor added immediately. James looked relieved at this potential resolution. "We have a motion to table the visitor restriction policy for further review. All in favor?" A strong chorus of "aye" filled the room. When James called for opposed votes, only Miranda and two of her closest allies responded. "The motion carries," James announced. "The visitor restriction policy is tabled pending further review and community consultation." Miranda's expression darkened with barely contained fury. She leaned forward to speak again, but Patrick placed a restraining hand on her arm, murmuring something that made her pause. I had achieved my immediate objective, blocking the policy that would have restricted my access to my grandchildren. But I could see from Miranda's expression that this defeat would only intensify her determination to find other means of control. The meeting continued with discussion of less controversial matters, but the underlying tension remained palpable. Miranda sat rigid in her seat, occasionally whispering intensely with Diane while Patrick tended to the increasingly restless children. As the meeting concluded, residents began to filter out of the community center. I remained seated, observing Miranda's interactions with her remaining allies. Their huddled conversation and frequent glances in my direction suggested they were already planning their next move. Eleanor leaned close to whisper, "This isn't over. She's too invested in this power play to simply accept defeat." "I know," I replied quietly. "But we've bought time and demonstrated that her support isn't as strong as she believed." Patrick approached with Sophie sleeping in his arms, Emma and Lucas trailing behind him. Miranda was still engaged in heated discussion with Diane and Martin across the room. "That was quite a meeting," Patrick said, his tone carefully neutral, though his eyes conveyed more. "The children are tired. We should be heading home." I nodded, understanding his cautious approach given the public setting. "Of course. It was good to see you all." Emma stepped forward slightly, her expression conflicted. "Grandma, are you and Mom fighting because of us?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. Before I could formulate an appropriate response, Lucas interjected. "It's about the rules, right? Mom wants rules about when you can visit, and you don't think that's fair." Their perceptiveness was both impressive and heartbreaking. These children understood more of the adult conflict surrounding them than either Miranda or I had acknowledged. "Your mother and I have different perspectives on some things," I said carefully. "But both of us love you very much. Sometimes adults disagree about rules and boundaries." Emma studied my face intently. "Mom says you're trying to undermine her authority. What does that mean?" Patrick shifted uncomfortably. "Emma, this isn't the place for that discussion." "It means your mother thinks I'm questioning her decisions as a parent," I explained gently, respecting Emma's maturity enough to offer a genuine answer. "Which isn't my intention, but I understand why she might feel that way." Lucas looked confused. "But you're her mom? Aren't moms supposed to help their kids make good decisions?" The innocent wisdom in his question brought a smile to my lips. Relationships between parents and children get more complicated as everyone grows up. Your mom is an adult with her own family to raise, and sometimes my help isn't what she needs or wants. Miranda's voice cut through our conversation as she approached rapidly. "Children, it's time to go. Now." Her tone brooked no argument as she took Sophie from Patrick's arms. "Patrick, bring Emma and Lucas to the car immediately." The sharpness in her voice made Lucas flinch. Emma looked between her mother and me, clearly distressed by the tension. "Miranda," I said quietly. "They were just saying goodnight." I don't need you explaining my children's behavior to me, she snapped, then immediately composed herself, glancing around at the few remaining residents. We've had a long evening. The children need their rest. Patrick placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. Let's go, sweetheart. It's past everyone's bedtime. As they turned to leave, Emma looked back at me with a troubled expression. I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile, though my heart ached at the confusion and anxiety these adult conflicts were causing her. Once they had left, Eleanor touched my arm sympathetically. The children are remarkably perceptive. Too perceptive. For their own peace of mind, I agreed sadly. They shouldn't be caught in the middle of this power struggle. Richard Chan approached as we gathered our belongings. Congratulations on the procedural victory, he said in a lowered voice. But Miranda was already discussing alternative approaches with her allies. She mentioned the property management company specifically. This confirmed my suspicion that Miranda would attempt to appeal directly to what she believed was the corporate ownership of Oakwood Estates. Thank you for the warning, Richard. I think it's time to prepare for our next step. Outside in the parking lot, most residents had already departed. The autumn night was clear and cool, stars visible above the carefully landscaped community I had created 2 decades earlier. As Eleanor and I walked to our cars, I spotted Miranda standing alone near her Audi, Patrick having apparently taken the children home separately. When she saw me, she straightened her posture and deliberately walked in my direction. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes blazed with determination. Congratulations on your little parliamentary maneuver, she said coldly when she reached us. Enjoy the victory while it lasts. Miranda, I sighed. This doesn't have to be a battle. We could work together to find a compromise that respects both your boundaries and my relationship with the children. She gave a short, harsh laugh. Always so reasonable on the surface, always positioning yourself as the wise, balanced matriarch while undermining me behind the scenes. That's not my intention, I began, but she cut me off with a sharp gesture. Save it. This community meeting was just one venue. There are other approaches, other forums. Her smile was tight and confident. I've already scheduled a meeting with Oakwood Property Group for Friday. As the most significant homeowner in the community and a board member, they'll certainly be interested in my proposals for improving property values and community governance. Eleanor and I exchanged glances. Miranda had indeed escalated quickly, attempting to go over the homeowners association directly to the property owners, unaware that she was actually seeking a meeting with me. Miranda, I said carefully, before you pursue that approach, there's something you should know. I'm not interested in your advice or warnings, she interrupted dismissively. For once, Mother, this is something you can't control or manipulate. The property group has significant financial interest in maintaining Oakwood's exclusive character. They'll understand my concerns about unrestricted access and declining standards. I could have revealed the truth then, that I was Oakwood Property Group, that the meeting she had requested would be with my representatives, that her entire strategy was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of the power dynamics at play. But looking at my daughter's face, flushed with righteous certainty and long-simmering resentment, I recognized that such a public revelation would only deepen the breach between us. We'll talk again after your meeting, I said simply. Miranda interpreted my restraint as defeat. Her posture relaxed slightly, confidence returning to her expression. Yes, we will, and the conversation will be very different then. With that, she turned and walked to her car, her heels clicking purposefully on the asphalt. Eleanor waited until Miranda had driven away before speaking. You could have told her the truth right there. And humiliate her publicly? What would that accomplish? I shook my head. No, this needs to be handled more carefully, especially with the children already sensing the conflict between us. So what's your plan for Friday's meeting? I gazed out over the community, streetlights illuminating the winding roads and manicured common areas. I think it's time for Miranda to meet the owner of Oakwood Estates properly, not as her mother, but as the developer and property manager she's been so eager to influence. That will be quite the revelation, Eleanor observed. Are you prepared? For her reaction? Not entirely, I admitted. But sometimes truth, however uncomfortable, is the only path forward. Miranda needs to understand that her attempts to exclude me from the community and control my relationship with my grandchildren have larger consequences than she realized. As we parted ways in the parking lot, I felt a curious mixture of sadness and resolve. The evening's victory was temporary at best. Friday's confrontation would force a more fundamental reckoning, one that would either begin a painful healing process or permanently alter my relationship with my daughter. Either way, Miranda would finally understand that banning me from seeing my grandchildren had been a profound miscalculation. She had believed herself to be asserting control over a submissive mother, only to discover she was challenging a woman who had built an entire community from the ground up. The subdivision she called home, the streets where her children played, the parks where they picnicked, even the very house where they slept tonight. All of it existed because of my vision and investment. Not facts I had ever wanted to use as leverage, but circumstances she had created through her own actions. As I drove home along the curving roads of Oakwood Estates, I passed Miranda's Tudor-style house. Through the windows, I could see warm light spilling onto the lawn. Patrick, moving through the rooms, presumably preparing the children for bed. This home that had been meant as a gift of love had somehow become the centerpiece of a power struggle neither of us had anticipated. Friday would bring clarity, one way or another. Miranda would finally see me not just as her controlling mother, but as a woman who had built something significant, something lasting, and perhaps in that recognition, we might find a new path forward, if not immediate reconciliation, then at least mutual respect. For now, I had achieved my immediate goal. The visitor restriction policy had been blocked. My access to my grandchildren remained intact, and in 3 days, Miranda would discover that in her determination to ban me from her life, she had unwittingly challenged the very foundation beneath her feet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.